The air was thick with a silence, so profound it seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by the faint rustling of unseen winds. Jesus stood at the threshold of a vast, shadowy chasm, his expression resolute. The world behind him faded into a muted blur, and before him stretched an abyss that defied comprehension. This was the Hades, the domain of the dead, a place neither wholly physical nor entirely spiritual. Its boundaries shimmered, pulsing faintly with a sinister, otherworldly energy. Stepping forward, Jesus crossed into the gloom, and the temperature dropped perceptibly. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, a cold mixture of jagged stone and ash. Strange whispers filled the air, not words, but fragments of thoughts, fears, and regrets from countless souls trapped in this desolate plain. It was a realm unlike any other, where time had no meaning, and the light of the world above could not penetrate. Here, the laws of nature and spirit blurred, governed instead by the will of ancient powers. The first thing that struck him was the vastness of the place. The horizon stretched infinitely in every direction, punctuated by structures that seemed to grow out of the ground itself. Towering monoliths of bone-like stone, twisting spires reaching toward an unseen ceiling, and rivers of molten despair coursing like veins through the landscape. This was no ordinary underworld. It was a prison of the soul, where the weight of unfulfilled destinies hung heavy. As he ventured further, Jesus' steps were deliberate but unwavering. He bore no visible weapon, yet his presence exuded authority, as if the very fabric of the Hades resisted him, but could not stop him. Suddenly, the ground trembled. From the shadows emerged figures cloaked in darkness, their forms shifting and indistinct. These were the Arcontes, ancient custodians of the realm, their very existence tied to the ignorance and fear that kept souls bound. One stepped forward, its voice a discordant melody of mockery and menace. Who dares tread here? This is the domain of the forgotten, the unloved. Your light does not belong. Jesus raised his gaze, calm but unyielding. I come for those who have waited in chains. Your dominion ends where truth begins. His voice was steady, carrying a weight that silenced even the ethereal winds. The Arconte snarled, its form twisting violently as it tried to intimidate. They are ours, bound by their own choices, their own blindness. You cannot undo what they have done to themselves. Jesus stepped closer, unshaken. Their blindness was cultivated by lies. I bring light, and with it, freedom. The clash was not one of swords or brute force, but of wills. The Arconte lunged, its form unraveling like smoke, seeking to envelop him. But where the darkness touched him, it recoiled, unable to withstand his presence. The other Arcontes watched, their movements hesitant, as if recognizing an authority greater than their own. As the defeated Arconte dissolved into the shadows, the others parted, allowing Jesus to pass. The first gate had been crossed, but the journey had only begun. Ahead, the terrain shifted, growing darker and more oppressive. The cries of the damned grew louder, their anguish palpable, pressing against him like a tidal wave. Each step forward was a step deeper into the heart of this broken realm, where the true battle awaited, not just against the keepers of the Hades, but against the ignorance and despair that had ensnared the souls of the lost for generations. As Jesus moved on, the whispers of the Hades seemed to grow quieter, almost reverent, as if the realm itself recognized the arrival of something, or someone unprecedented. And yet, at its core, the darkness stirred, aware that its very nature was being challenged. The path led to a river unlike any other, its waters black and shimmering with a malevolent light. This was the river of lost souls, known in ancient whispers as Styx by the Greeks and as Abaddon's vein by those who sought forbidden knowledge. Its currents carried more than water. Faces of the damned writhed within its depths, their silent screams forming an eerie melody that echoed across the desolation. Jesus approached the riverbank, his eyes fixed on the figures struggling within the flow. These were the souls trapped in the deepest despair, chained by regrets and unable to find rest. The current surged with violent energy, as if sensing his presence and recoiling in both fear and defiance. "Do you think to cross, Nazarene?" a voice growled from the shadows. Emerging from the mist was another guardian, a being that seemed to embody the chaos of the river itself. Its form was fluid, constantly shifting between humanoid and serpentine shapes, its eyes glowing with a sickly green light. "No one passes without tribute, and your kind has nothing to offer." Jesus stood firm, unyielding. "You demand tribute from those who have nothing. Your power thrives on despair, but it ends here." The guardian laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "You think to command me? I am bound to this river, as it is bound to the souls it claims. To defy me is to defy the flow of death itself." With a voice calm, yet commanding, Jesus spoke. "I am the resurrection and the life. Death answers to me, not the other way around." At his words, the river churned violently, the souls within it crying out in a chorus of anguish and hope. The guardian recoiled, its form destabilizing as light emanated from Jesus, piercing the murky waters. The cries of the souls grew louder, and for a moment, the river's current slowed, revealing a pathway of solid ground beneath the surface. The guardian let out a guttural scream, its form dissolving into mist as Jesus stepped onto the newly revealed path. Each step he took radiated a light that pushed back the oppressive darkness, and the souls within the river began to rise, their chains breaking as they were lifted out of the current. When he reached the far shore, Jesus turned back briefly, his gaze solemn. The river had calmed, its surface now reflecting the light of hope rather than the depths of despair. But the journey was far from over. Ahead lay the citadel of torment, the heart of Hades' dominion, where the final battle would be fought. Beyond the river of lost souls rose a towering structure carved into the very bones of the underworld. The citadel of torment, shrouded in black mist, pulsed with a dark, sentient energy. Its jagged spires scraped the void above, and its gates, massive, ironclad, and etched with runes of binding, seemed alive, pulsating faintly as if fueled by the despair of those it imprisoned. The cries of countless souls echoed faintly as Jesus approached, their agony embedded in the very air. The citadel loomed not just as a physical fortress, but as a monument to millennia of suffering, a testament to the dominion of the powers that thrived on despair and ignorance. Jesus paused before the gates, his gaze unwavering. As if sensing his presence, the gates creaked open with a deafening groan. From the shadows emerged 3 figures, each radiating a sinister authority. They were the triumvirs of despair, ancient rulers of Hades tasked with preserving its boundaries. Their forms shifted between human and monstrous, their voices resonating as a collective chorus. "Why have you come here, light-bearer?" the central figure hissed, its eyes glowing like dying embers. "This is a realm where even hope dies. Your presence is an affront to its nature. I have come to release what was never yours to hold," Jesus replied, his voice steady. "Your dominion thrives on lies, but the truth has come to set them free." The triumvirs laughed, a sound that seemed to claw at the very fabric of the air. "You are bold, Nazarene, but this is no place for redemption. Here, even truth is twisted." The ground beneath them trembled as they raised their hands, summoning dark energy that coalesced into chains, serpentine and alive, writhing as they sought to ensnare him. But as the chains lunged, they dissolved into nothingness the moment they touched the light emanating from him. The central triumvir growled, stepping forward. "You think yourself invincible. This is not your domain." Jesus took a step closer, his gaze piercing. "This domain exists because humanity was deceived into thinking they belonged here. I am here to reclaim what is mine." The battle that ensued was unlike anything seen in the physical realm. It was not a clash of weapons, but of essence and will. The triumvirs hurled waves of shadow, their attacks resonating with the anguish of the countless souls bound within the citadel. Jesus stood firm, his light not merely deflecting the attacks, but unraveling their very fabric, revealing the fragile lies beneath. As the triumvirs faltered, their forms destabilizing, the very walls of the citadel began to crack. The cries of the imprisoned souls grew louder, their despair transforming into a rising tide of hope. The fortress itself seemed to quake under the weight of its unraveling power. "You cannot undo eternity," one of the triumvirs roared, its voice desperate as it began to dissipate. "Eternity belongs to truth," Jesus replied. With a final burst of light, the triumvirs were undone, their forms scattering like ash in the wind. The gates of the citadel burst open, and a flood of light poured in. Within, countless souls stood chained, their faces weary and broken. At the sight of him, many fell to their knees, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You are free," Jesus said, his voice echoing with authority and compassion. "The chains that bound you were lies. Rise and walk into the light." As he spoke, the chains disintegrated, and the souls began to rise, their forms growing brighter as the weight of their torment lifted. The citadel itself began to collapse, its dark power undone. Yet even as the structure fell, a deeper shadow stirred, one that had remained hidden until now, a force older and more insidious than the triumvirs. The ground split open, and from the depths emerged a presence that made even the newly freed souls recoil. It was the Lord of Hades, the ancient warden of the underworld, his form vast and formless, radiating an aura of primordial dread. The next trial awaited. The air grew heavier as Jesus stood before the Lord of Hades, a being whose presence eclipsed all else in the underworld. Its form was an ever-shifting amalgam of shadow and fire, a swirling vortex of malice and despair. Eyes innumerable and piercing, burned like dying stars within the darkness of its essence, each one holding the weight of eternity. "You tread too far, light-bearer," the entity's voice thundered, resonating from every corner of the collapsing citadel. "This is my domain, forged in the void and consecrated by the despair of countless ages. What right do you have to challenge me here?" Jesus stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "The souls you hold were never yours. You exist by deception, binding them with lies and feeding on their ignorance. But the truth has come to set them free." The Lord of Hades laughed, a sound that seemed to unravel the very fabric of reality. Truth, freedom, empty words. These souls were condemned by their own failures, their own choices. "Their despair is my strength, their chains my glory." The ground trembled violently as the being's form expanded, engulfing the space around them in an oppressive darkness. Yet even in the consuming blackness, Jesus radiated an unyielding light. The two forces collided, their clash reverberating across the realm, shaking the very foundations of Hades. The Lord of Hades struck first, sending waves of darkness cascading toward Jesus like a tidal wave of anguish. Each wave carried the weight of millennia of sorrow, voices of the lost crying out in unison. Yet as they reached him, they were shattered by his light, dissolving into nothingness. "Your power," Jesus said, his voice calm yet unrelenting, "is a parasite, feeding on the pain of others. But pain cannot extinguish hope, and despair cannot silence truth." With a gesture, the Lord of Hades summoned legions of spectral wraiths, their hollow forms echoing with hatred and fear. They surged toward Jesus, their claws outstretched, their wails deafening. But as they reached him, they were consumed by his presence, their forms evaporating into the void. "You cannot destroy me," the Lord of Hades roared, its voice tinged with desperation. "I am eternal, born of the darkness in every heart." "Darkness exists only where light is absent," Jesus replied. "And I am the light of the world." With those words, he raised his hand, and from it emanated a brilliance that pierced the deepest shadows of the underworld. The light was not merely bright, it was alive, carrying the essence of truth and grace. It swept through the realm, illuminating every corner, every hidden crevice where despair had taken root. The Lord of Hades shrieked as the light enveloped it, its form writhing and shrinking under the relentless radiance. The citadel of torment, once a fortress of despair, began to collapse entirely, its dark essence dissolving into the light. The freed souls, now glowing with newfound hope, ascended, their faces no longer marked by anguish, but by peace. As the Lord of Hades faded into nothingness, its final words echoed faintly, "This is not the end." Jesus stood amidst the ruins, the underworld now transformed. The river of lost souls had stilled, its waters clear and tranquil, reflecting the light that now filled the realm. The cries of the damned were silenced, replaced by a profound, serene quiet. Turning to the remaining souls, Jesus spoke, "The chains of death are broken. Follow me into life." With those words, he led them toward the horizon, where the boundaries of Hades dissolved into a radiant expanse. The souls followed, their forms growing brighter with every step as they ascended toward a realm beyond the reach of despair. But even as the underworld faded behind him, a faint ripple of shadow lingered in the distance, a reminder that the battle between light and darkness was not yet over. As the radiant procession moved away from the crumbling ruins of Hades, a peculiar tension filled the air. Though the souls followed Jesus, their newfound freedom glowing brighter with each step, a faint tremor in the spiritual fabric of the realm hinted at an unresolved conflict. At the edge of the underworld's transformation, a massive, forgotten gateway loomed, an ancient structure covered in cryptic glyphs, both celestial and infernal. Its presence was a stark contrast to the light that now flooded the realm, standing as a final barrier between Hades and the world above. The souls hesitated, their light flickering uncertainly as they gazed at the towering portal. Beyond it lay not merely freedom, but a reckoning. For centuries, they had languished in despair, their spirits bound by ignorance and regret. To cross the threshold would mean embracing the unknown, a journey toward judgment or grace. Jesus turned to them, his voice calm and reassuring. "This is not the end, but the beginning. Beyond this gateway lies truth. You are no longer prisoners of your past. The chains that bound you have been broken. Walk forward in faith." As his words settled over the crowd, a sudden, guttural laugh echoed from the darkness behind them. From the shadows emerged a new figure, one that seemed neither fully of Hades nor entirely of the light. Its appearance was ambiguous and disjointed, as though its form was pieced together from fractured memories and ancient fears. "Did you think it would be so easy?" the figure hissed, its voice serpentine, dripping with malice. "The forgotten gateway is no ordinary passage. It holds the weight of eons, the curses of those who came before. Not all who attempt to cross it are allowed." Jesus regarded the being with a piercing gaze. "And who are you to deny them? You have no authority here." The figure smirked, its form solidifying momentarily into a grotesque, serpentine visage. "I am the keeper of the threshold. These souls carry more than regret. They carry the echoes of the choices that brought them here. This gateway reveals the truth they hide, even from themselves. Will they step through, knowing they must face what lies beyond?" The souls murmured in unease, their forms dimming slightly. The keeper's words stirred doubts long buried, resurrecting fragments of guilt and fear. Jesus stepped forward, his voice steady. "Truth is not to be feared, for it is the path to life. They have carried the weight of their burdens long enough. The light has come to release them." The keeper's expression twisted into a sneer. "Then let them prove their worth." With a gesture, the gateway pulsed with a blinding, otherworldly energy. Each soul was struck by a vision, a flash of a life they had lived. Their failures, their moments of cruelty, the times they had turned away from love and light. Many fell to their knees, weeping. The burden of memory was heavy, but as the visions unfolded, a deeper truth became clear. The light that had freed them was not merely external. It had begun to grow within them, illuminating even the darkest corners of their being. One by one, the souls rose. Their light burned brighter, no longer dimmed by fear or regret. They stepped toward the gateway, their forms becoming clearer, more whole, as they embraced their past and walked into their future. The keeper recoiled, its power waning as the souls crossed the threshold. Finally, it turned to Jesus, its form crumbling under his gaze. "What are you?" it whispered, its voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," Jesus replied. "Your hold is broken." With those words, the keeper dissolved into the shadows, its presence erased by the brilliance of the gateway. As the last soul passed through, the gateway shimmered, transforming into a portal of pure light. Jesus lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the now empty expanse of Hades. The underworld had been defeated, its dominion shattered. Yet he knew that the ripple of shadow left behind was not to be ignored. Stepping through the gateway, he ascended, leading the freed souls toward the heavenly realms. Behind them, the forgotten gateway closed with a final, resonant hum, sealing the underworld in its transformed state. In the heavens above, a new dawn broke, the light spreading across creation. Yet even as the celestial harmony resumed, the memory of the descent remained, a reminder of the price of freedom and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. For in the deepest corners of existence, where shadow and light meet, the battle was not over. It had only just begun. As the heavens rejoiced and the earth stirred with newfound hope, the spiritual realms rippled with the aftershocks of Jesus' victory in Hades. The realms of light and darkness had collided in a battle of cosmic significance, and the consequences reverberated far beyond the moment of triumph. In the celestial courts, the angels sang songs of glory, their voices echoing across eternity. Gabriel and Michael stood among them, their swords sheathed, but their expressions resolute. They had watched from the heavens as their king descended into the abyss, trusting in his unmatched authority. Now they bore witness to the aftermath, a shift in the spiritual balance that would change the fate of creation forever. "His light has pierced even the deepest shadow," Michael said, his voice a mixture of awe and certainty. "What the enemy sought to claim as his domain is no longer untouchable. Redemption is now available to all who seek it." Gabriel nodded, his gaze fixed on the shimmering veil separating the heavens from the earth. But the adversary will not rest. This victory, though decisive, is not the end. It is the beginning of a new era, a time when mankind must choose between the chains of the past and the freedom of truth. Meanwhile, on earth, a subtle yet profound change began to take root. The veils that had long obscured the spiritual from the physical started to thin, and those with eyes to see could sense a stirring in the air. The tombs of saints, long sealed by death, cracked open, and their occupants were seen walking among the living, testifying to the power of resurrection. It was a moment that defied comprehension, but its significance could not be ignored. In the hearts of the liberated souls, joy mingled with awe as they ascended into the light. They had dwelt in despair for so long that the sudden flood of hope felt almost overwhelming. Among them were kings and peasants, prophets and sinners, united by their shared experience of redemption. They carried with them the memories of their chains, but now bore a greater truth. Freedom was not only possible, but promised. Far below, in the recesses of darkness, the forces of Hades seethed with fury. The Arcontes, who had once guarded their dominion, now huddled in fear, their forms flickering like dying embers. The Prince of Lies, Lucifer himself, brooded in his throne of shadows, his mind a tempest of anger and strategy. His dominion had been challenged, his authority undermined, but he was not defeated. "This changes nothing," he hissed, his voice resonating like thunder across the void. "The war is far from over. If he claims the souls, I will claim their minds. If he breaks their chains, I will weave new ones, more insidious than before. Yet even as he plotted, a faint tremor coursed through the abyss, a reminder of the unshakable light that now radiated from its core. The once absolute power of death had been fractured, and though the darkness would persist, it could no longer reign unchecked. On the earth, the disciples of Jesus gathered, their hearts heavy with sorrow, yet flickering with hope. They did not yet fully understand the scope of what had transpired, but they felt its echoes in their spirits. The stone would soon be rolled away, and the empty tomb would become the ultimate testament to what had been accomplished. As dawn broke on the third day, the world stood on the precipice of transformation. The forces of light and darkness were poised for the battles yet to come, but one truth was now undeniable. The gates of Hades had been breached, and the keys of death and life were in the hands of the one who could wield them with justice and mercy. The story of descent and victory would not merely be remembered. It would ripple through the fabric of existence, a timeless reminder that even in the deepest abyss, light could prevail. The curtain closed on the underworld, but the greater story, the story of redemption, resistance, and the enduring struggle for the soul of humanity, was just beginning.